This is our third video reflection on WLDF468 materials. This week in lecture and reading, we learned about spatial dependence and autocorrelation.
To begin, we learned about point patterns, which can be included with the dispersion metrics, which has plot-based and distance-based, and first-order metrics as well as second-order metrics.
First-order metrics are those such as the variance to mean ratio plot. These base a measure of dispersion that is agnostic to scale. Another example is a Clark and Evans index. These are distance-based measures of dispersion, also agnostic to scale.
Second-order metrics include Ripley's K-distribution, which is the distance-based measure of dispersion across scales. The second-order metrics compare the variable in question to the background to determine if our sample is random.
Another measure we learned about is kernel intensity. This is the probability distribution placed over each point to estimate the intensity of points at any location. This is useful for ecological processes because of the intensity's flexible shape and bandwidth. Therefore, we can model different levels of concentration in accordance to our variable of interest.
Parallelograms, points along a gradient are measured relative to their distance from each other. The autocorrelation across a gradient, and this is only for endogenous variables.
Two other statistical measures we learned include Geary's C and Moran's I. Geary's C dictates that if its value is less than 1, we've observed a positive spatial correlation. If it's greater than 1, it's negative, and if equal to 1, then it is totally random. These measure observations of the same variable. In Moran's I, standard spatial convergence is used. This models spatial autocorrelation and spatial interaction, and is based off of Toevler's law, saying that objects closer to each other will display more similar properties than those farther apart.
For our reading, we learned about landscape pattern metrics. Landscape pattern analysis involves 4 basic landscape patterns, which are spatial point patterns, just a collection of entities where the geographical location of the entities are the primary interest. Linear network patterns, which is the collections of linear landscape elements that intersect to form a network.
We also learned of surface patterns. These represent quantitative measurements that vary across the landscape with no explicit boundaries, as well as categorical map patterns. These represent data where the system property of interest is represented as a mosaic of discrete patches. Speaking of, we also learned that patches are the building blocks for categorical maps, and common landscape metric can be defined at 3 patch levels: the patch level, the class level, and the landscape level.